of that is not me. A lot of that is a tremendous team of volunteers that are helping me, including people like Peter and the assistant directors, of which one of our ADs is here today. So a lot of what I'm doing is not real visible because it's internal ARRL stuff, but I'm going to give you a peek behind the curtain so you can see kind of what we're doing to try to make the league better. And then we're also going to talk about some of the work that Anita and the other three assistant directors are doing. So let me go ahead and get into this. All right. So this is kind of the dance card for today. We're going to talk about the club grant program, some work we've done to build public support and awareness for amateur radio. If you all remember, that's something that's very high on my list. I think that we're never going to win legislative battles and protect our spectrum unless we get the public to appreciate how valuable and important amateur radio is. I'm going to tell you about the work I'm doing inside the ARRL. We've come up with a new award for directors. It's called Worked All Committees, and I'm working on the 5-band version of it right now. There's some good work that Mike Walters, Steve Goodgame, and I have been doing to help clubs. We talked a lot about transparency and communications. I'll give you my report card on what we've done there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the work that the assistant directors are doing. Okay. All right, club grant program. How many people are familiar with the club grant program? Anybody know anything about this or have heard of it? Okay. So basically, background for those of you who maybe don't know much about it, about a year and a half ago, the ARDC gave the ARRL Foundation $500,000 with the direction to give it to clubs. And the thinking there was that the ARRL had the network and the support team to do that. And the way the program is structured, you don't have to be an ARRL affiliated club. You just have to be a club. The grants are available up to $25,000. And I got the job of, along with David Minster, of leading the group that set this whole program up. So it was kind of the first thing that I worked on as your director. The process involves coming up with a project that we kind of call is transformational. So what does that mean? We're looking to give money to folks who want to make a difference with that money beyond their immediate club. Training people to get on the air, doing mentoring work, licensing work, public service work, work in schools, setting up remote station resources for people who can't put antennas up and making them available. And there's also a special category for clubs that are struggling where you get a little bit of money to restart a club. So we rolled this out, the first round of it. It's structured to give the money away in 2 rounds. The first round we call the first tranche. 128 people responded asking for $1.74 million against the $250,000 we plan to give out. So the good news is lots of people were interested in club grants. And we picked the 24 best grants through a scoring system that Mike and I and others set up and awarded about $270,000 in the first round. Okay. New England, I think 3 or 4 clubs here in New England got pretty sizable grants. I'm really happy to see that. Now, just so you all wonder how this works, we have a weighted scoring system that looks at a whole bunch of different factors. And both in terms of how, quotes, transformational, how much impact is the project actually going to have, which is the #1 thing we use to choose the grants. And then we have a second set of stuff, which is kind of a checkoff to say, if we give you $25,000, do we believe you have the infrastructure and the discipline to spend it wisely and do the money part right? And basically there are 9 of us, of which I'm one, that score these grants. We're broken up into teams of 3, so every grant gets scored by at least 3 people. And the first thing that we do is we make sure that nobody's connected with a grant that they're scoring. So, for example, for most of the grants here in New England, particularly if I had any direct interaction with the club that applied, I was not on that scoring team. So a great deal of effort has been made here to make sure that the process is fair and nobody puts their finger on the scale in a way that's inappropriate. The second tranche is open now. The deadline is 7 p.m. Eastern time on November 4th, which is, I guess, about 3 weeks from now, maybe roughly. So if you know of a club that has an idea for a project, we have about $220-some thousand left to give out. Now would be a really good time to apply. And what we're hoping to do here is make the case to ARDC that this is making a real difference, and hopefully this won't be the only time that we do a club grant program. Okay. All right, did anybody go to the Big E this year or watch the Space Chat? Okay, Tony did. So one of the other things that I feel is really important is working with young people to get them excited about STEM learning and careers that can lead to through amateur radio, and also making the public aware of the good stuff that amateur radio does. Now, my own personal story is that early involvement in amateur radio led me to my career path. So this one is kind of personal for me. It made a huge difference in my life, okay? And so one of the things I've been involved in for a long period of time is the ARRL program, the group that helps schools and kids make contact with astronauts on the space station. So when the project started up to have an amateur radio presence at the Big E, we said, let's go out and we'll bend ARRL's rules and we'll get a space station contact and we'll do it at the Big E. Now, the Big E has about 1.6 million people attending, and on any given day there are at least 30,000 people there. They also have a very well-developed press relationship. So, for example, we did interviews around this contact, I think that were carried on 5 or 6 TV channels all around Massachusetts. So in addition to the people that saw this in person, we probably exposed amateur radio to several 100,000 people through this project, okay? The group of kids was from all over New England. New England SciTech set up the education program that goes with this. And just for fun, because I know these talks can be kind of dry, I have a little video clip that the folks from the ARRL made. David Mister came down and spoke as part of the pre-contact program. I'm going to play. How many of you have seen a space station contact? Has anybody ever seen one? Dale has, Anita has, a few people have. So I'm just going to play a little bit of the video here, I hope, so you all can see what this was like. That is, if I can find my mouse, I'll play a video. All right, here we go.
Oscar Romeo 4 ISS, Oscar Romeo 4 ISS. It is Oscar November 4 India Sierra Sierra for an ARRL contact. Copy, over.
Oscar November 4 ISS, this is Oscar Romeo 4 ISS. You loud and clear, how many?
Here at New England's Great State Fair, the Big E, amateur radio on the International Space Station offered a dozen local students a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Students made contact with the International Space Station and talked to astronaut Bob Hines, NI5RQT.
My name is May, KC1OMG. Did you find the astronaut training program was mentally or physically strenuous or stressful? Over.
Hey May, the answer is yes. It was both mentally and physically strenuous, but it was also a lot of fun, learning lots of different things, working with great people, and getting to do some pretty amazing things. Over.
My name is Steven, call sign KC1RVR. Have you experienced life boxes or astronaut time? Over.
Hey Ian, I have not actually experienced either of those things. There is another thing called SANS, which is Sierra Alpha November Sierra.
This next question is my favorite.
It causes some astronauts to have
You'll see how inspirational this can be for young
but that is something doctors are researching still. Over.
My name is Jackson. It is my absolute dream to be sitting in the same position you are. If you could give me just one piece of advice, what would it be? Over.
Hey Jackson, well I hope you get to do it. The piece of advice I would give you is to just find something that you're really interested in and go pursue that as a profession and do as good as you can with it and above.
Okay. So you all get the general idea here. So that last young man, dream was to be an astronaut. And I can tell you, I've been involved in different capacities. I'm a mentor. I work with schools to arrange these things and get them ready. I'm a ground station to do what the gentleman in Belgium did for this contact and actually do the radio link. And almost every contact I've been involved in, there's 1 or 2 young people where this experience changes their life. And I think maybe for that young man that you heard about wanting to be an astronaut and getting a chance to talk to somebody in space, maybe that was an example of that happening. I've seen kids walk up to teachers after these contacts and ask for more work to do so they could improve their grades. And so this is really pretty special stuff here, okay? And, you know, the addition of the TV coverage between the ARRL's live stream and our live stream, I think it's taken over 3,000 views worldwide. It was featured in Ukraine on a blog about amateur radio and young people. So this kind of stuff has big, big impact, and I encourage any of you who might have a relationship with a school or a youth group to consider getting involved in doing something like this. It is great stuff. Okay, and these are some of the people we brought together to do this. These things involve a lot of collaboration. The Big E was extremely generous. They gave us their largest arena, professional people to run it. They arranged for amateur radio operators to get in free with their friends on the day of the contact. So the Big E really stood up and put a lot into this, as did New England SciTech. Black Helicopters, a professional media production company. They produced the live stream gratis for us. The ARRL sent David and a whole crew of people to video it, promote it. So all in all, it was a great collaboration. All right, so what's your director doing and why should you care? Well, the way the ARRL works is directors get appointed to committees, board committees. And there are 3 standing committees: Administration and Finance Program Services Committee, which worries mostly about contests, and the Emergency Communications and Field Service Committee, which is all about MCOM and clubs, basically. I was very happy to be appointed to Administration and Finance, which is basically the committee that oversees how headquarters operates, the budgets, recruiting, pretty much all the operational stuff of the ARRL. And my task that I was given now, if you all heard David Minster recently, you know that the ARRL has an operating deficit this year of over $1 million. So ANF has got some serious work to do to figure out how to grow the ARRL and close that gap. And a lot of that's driven by increasing expenses. Just like everything cost is going up for you, everything that the ARRL does, ink, printing, postage, a lot of the programs we do, salaries, all of that stuff's increasing on a fixed income of the members we have times the dues, okay? So we recommended about a dozen programs that the ARRL can use to grow membership. One of the direct outputs, you probably heard David Minster talk about the Year of the Volunteer. That program is in part based on the recommendations from this committee. Okay, so it's going to take a while for all this stuff to play out. Some of the other things, encouragement to do remote stations so Morehampton gain access, licensing and mentoring work on part of the ARRL, and a whole bunch of other activities, some of which are a little bit more sensitive that I can't talk about, are coming out of that committee. And there's probably 1.5 years worth of work to play all of that out. Now, you're supposed to only be on one committee at a time, but I also learned something very important early in my life, which is that permission is much harder than forgiveness. So one of the first things I did in my capacity as a director, I can attend any of these meetings, I went to the ECFSC and said, you know what, I know you guys aren't going to give me a vote, but I want to fix the national traffic system. Can I create a subcommittee to do that? And they thought about it for a little while and gave us the go-ahead. We formed a committee. Marcia Ford's on it, Bud Hipsley, who some of you are traffic handlers probably know Bud. A whole bunch of other people as well from all over the United States. We produced a recommendation, rolled it out to 3/4 of the division, signed up 40 volunteers to implement it, and before the end of the year, we're going to start actually realizing that program. The first thing you're going to see probably next week is a series of new traffic drops coming out of headquarters to go all over the United States to give traffic handlers some more meaningful traffic to handle, and also to measure and start to baseline how well the traffic system is actually performing so we can improve it. That's going to be a big project, probably go on for multiple years to implement everything that we've laid out. Also in ECFSC, whenever anything related to clubs come up, I raise my hand. So one of the things, and I'll show you the layout for this, that folks are concerned that many clubs need help with some skill building. Things like, how do you recruit volunteers? How do you develop your leaders? How do you recruit new members? How do you fix your website and publicize your activities? So Steve Goodgame, who's in charge of the Learning Center, Mike Walters, who's in charge of the field staff, and I put together a quick committee in ECFSC and laid out a club webinar program to provide this kind of training, and I'll explain how that's going to work here in another slide. Also, somebody decided that because I knew a little bit about finance that I should be on the investment management committee, which oversees the ARRL's endowment portfolio. It's about a $40 million portfolio that we're managing through an external investment manager called Cap Trust. So this group provides oversight for what that investor group is doing, sets what's called the investment policy statement, which kind of sets the guardrails for what they're allowed to do with our money, and then basically kind of monitors their performance to make sure that our criteria and so on are right. As I mentioned, I was part of the ARRL Foundation subcommittee with David to set up and others to set up the club grant program. So these are kind of my portfolio for 10 months in office. All right, our vice director, Phil Temples, is also very active. He's involved in the ARRS committee with space station stuff. The ARRL gives a significant amount of money to ARRS every year to support their work. And so he's involved in the oversight there. He's actually the board liaison and sort of semi-chair of the ARDF, the Direction Finding Committee. And he's also on the band planning committee. And I've recently given him some homework to do around protecting the ACDS spectrum for all of us who need to use that for emergencies. And he was in charge of all the promotional work, the PR work for the Big E Space Chat, which was a huge job. Phil wrote press releases, hit every email list he could find, had the Big E print out flyers and hand them out to all of their guests as they came through the gate. So Phil did a great deal of work to make that contact successful. And of course, Phil is the webmaster for our division website, which literally a day doesn't go by that Phil doesn't publish something. And also he runs in his free time the program for HEM Exposition. So Phil contributes a tremendous amount. And probably a lot of what you all see is more grounded on things that Phil does than what I do. All right, so club development. What we did here, this is the webinar series that we're trying to roll out to help clubs develop leaders and their skills and be more effective. I am convinced that pretty much the biggest force magnifier that the ARRL has is the club system. And one of my goals in the time I have to serve in this office is to try to make that system a hell of a lot stronger than I found it. So this is a set of topics that Steve, Mike, and I came up with for webinars. And you can see leadership development, how to operate efficiently and do the finances, recruiting, licensing, mentoring, training, something that those of you who know me is very high on my list. Creating new activities. Clubs live or die by the amount of activities that they do and create. I can almost guarantee that if you look at a club that's creating new stuff, they're growing. And if you look at a club that's been doing the same 10 things for 20 years, they're declining. So this one's really, really important. How do you do publicity? Not something that most amateur radio folks are very good at. And that's really unfortunate because there's a lot of good stuff out there. And by the way, the league could stand this criticism as well that nobody knows about. So that's important. Creating a modern web presence and using it. Modernizing club governance, raising money, and running a club station or call sign. There's probably a dozen webinars that'll take 6 months or so for us to deliver. And the way we're going to run this is instead of headquarters trying to do this all, Mike Walters is going to go through a process where people can volunteer to do one of these webinars. Mike's going to kind of interview them and screen them to make sure they're good presenters and what they're talking about is reasonable and that kind of stuff. We're going to provide tools to have everybody's materials, Zoom backgrounds and PowerPoints and all that stuff look good. The Learning Center is going to record them, and they're going to be available as part of the ARRL Learning Center. And this is really important because going forward, we need to move the ARRL's business model from selling books to producing live content and figure out how to curate that and use it to drive membership and income. And if we're going to do that, there aren't enough people at headquarters to do all this content production themselves. So among other things, this program is going to be designed to see if we can learn how to have member-created content and start to evolve the ARRL's business model to take advantage of that. Okay, some other things. I'll just mention that. Who here is a member of a club? Who knows about the ARRL Club Commission Program? Then you just found out about it. So you see what I mean about that publicity thing? That's a problem, right? So the board just recently revised this. So clubs, if they sign up a new ARRL member, can get 15 of the $49 that person pays back. And if they get somebody to renew through their club, they get $5 of the renewal. So we just upped the amount of the renewal process to make that part more attractive and modernize the process. And what we're encouraging clubs to do is maybe set up quarterly membership drives where they get all the members that are ARRL to renew at the same time. You know, if you got a club with 40 people in it, and most of the club is ARRL members, that can be a couple $100, which is a nice chunk of change for you for what might be, hey Alan, for what might be 15 minutes effort at a membership meeting. And of course, if you're signing up new people, it starts to get into real money. So if you are interested in this, you can go on the ARRL website and pick up this form. We also have copies of it at Peter's table here, up in the building at the top of the hill, whatever that one's called. And so you can learn about this program as well. All right, communications. One of the things I promised to do was make communications better. And these are all the things that we promised to do. So this is kind of like my report card of what we did. So we said 2 cabinet meetings a year wasn't enough. We were going to have 4. We've already held 3. The next one's in December. So that one has been implemented. Who's on the cabinet? People like Peter and the field staff members are on the cabinet, club presidents, and quite frankly, anybody who wants to talk about the internal stuff going on at the league and give me advice on how I should be playing my role are welcome at those meetings. Town halls. You know, a lot of folks a couple elections ago ran on transparency and really didn't do much. I challenge you to find an open, unscripted Q&A session with any of those people. You won't find one. I challenge you to find anybody who's recorded a session like that. You won't find one. So here's what transparency really looks like. You ought to have a director that's accountable to address any concern or question that you have and at least give you a straight answer on what they can or think they can do about it. And they shouldn't be afraid to stand up in front of a public session and go on the record. That's what transparency fundamentally is. We started these town halls. We've done that. They're open scripted. We invite people to give us questions in advance. And that 2 or 3 people usually do. And we ask those questions in public anyway. And we record every single one of them. If you go on any DIV, you can watch 2 we've had so far. Division newsletters, thanks to Corey Golub in Maine, one of our assistant directors. We have the New England Beacon now. How many people have seen the New England Beacon? Anybody look at it? Hopefully you're enjoying that. We're planning to do another round here probably end of November, early December. So we're trying to get on a quarterly target for that newsletter. Club meeting attendance. Those of you who know me as I kind of grew up in the club system, that's been sort of my claim to fame. And I really think, again, the clubs are the force multiplier of the ARRL, and it's very, very important that the leadership be involved. So in addition to myself attending 6 club meetings a quarter, I've asked Phil, our vice director, and all the assistant directors to do the same. So hopefully you all are starting to get tired of seeing us. If we haven't hit your club yet and you want us to do that, please let me know or let Anita know, and we'll figure out a way to do it. But this is a top priority for us to just be there to know what's going on and to field any concerns that folks have. We can also do some presentations, forums, and that kind of stuff in your clubs if that's useful. If you need a speaker or whatever, we can help you there. And then lastly, I've made it a pretty high priority to hit all of the major hamfests in the division. And you can see this is our dance card. I'm getting ready to, I don't know of too many more big ones that are left this year, but we'll probably replay the same slate again next year. And again, this is a chance for me and others on the team to get out and interact with all of you and hear what's on your mind, which is important. And then lastly, if you are having a hamfest or involved in one, please schedule it in advance. Steve Ewald down at the league tries very hard, and I've given him strict instructions to make sure he looks carefully before he brings a hamfest for me to okay, that he's checked for conflicts and informed people. So we've had a couple instances where hamfests have collided with each other and it's caused some heartburn for people. So I'm trying to get Steve to work a little better on that front. And you can help us by making sure, you can register your hamfest, I think, over a year in advance. So if you know you're on a certain date and that date is really important to you, I would recommend that you register your hamfest sooner rather than later. Okay, so we can do our job better. All right, the last thing, and this is late breaking news. You all will remember I talked a lot about strategic planning and how important it was to revise the ARRL strategy. Well, I'm pleased to report that David Minster and I are putting together a committee to take a fresh look at the strategy of the ARRL and the business model going forward. I expect that work will kick off in November. I've been asked as to be the operational lead on it by David. And it's going to take some time because we're going to look at some really basic stuff about how the league operates, kind of what people who do this sort of work would call the business model and how that needs to evolve, what groups we're trying to serve, how we're going to attract young people, and a whole bunch of other things. So that's going to be a big project. The people on that committee are required to have real strategic planning experience. And there aren't too many of those inside the ARRL community. But we've got together a pretty good team of people to work on it and spent some time. I spent a whole day with David and some of the folks at headquarters kind of laying out how we're going to start it up a couple months ago. So expect to see that be a big project in 2023 for me. All right, so these are the people that really do the real stuff that you all see, our 4 assistant directors. Corey, who's been doing a great job of bringing people together to talk about and share what's working in MCOM and solve problems. Rob Leyden, whose charter is Spectrum Protection and Use, and Rob's actually got 2 initiatives. One is, and I'll show you a little more on this, one is he's setting up teams to help hams across New England solve RFI issues and equip them. And the other thing he's trying to do is promote the use of things like Arden to try to get some more activity in our spectrum, gigahertz and above, before, quite frankly, we lose it all to the mobile operators. So Rob has a very, very important task to do, okay? Anita is trying to perpetuate all things ham mentoring, development, licensing, training, and getting people on the air. And by the way, if you don't think this is important, there are 700,000 hams licensed in the United States. Anybody have a guess at what percentage of those people are active more than maybe once a year? What do you think that number is? Sorry? 5%. About 50% of the 350,000 we think are basically inactive. Okay, now here's another statistic that'll upset you even more. The probability if you know someone who gets a brand new tech license will be on the air a year later is less than 15%. So all this effort that we're pouring into licensing people and trying to get them on the air is largely being wasted. Now, we did a survey, Mike did an informal one, where we took, I think it was 8 or 10 section managers, and we said, give us the top 5 zip codes where you think are hams. And we literally went into the database for the FCC license and mailed a paper survey to everybody, whether they're ARRL members or not. Half the people that responded, or pretty close to it, were inactive, which is about, kind of confirmed some of the data I just gave you. The number 1 reasons that people gave us is lack of time, lack of elmering and mentoring, and financial issues. Okay, so why is this outreach on mentoring and licensing so damn important? Because it's going to aim at about 25% of that 350,000 people who are already licensed and are not doing anything with them. So we can move the needle even a little bit there. Guess what? Not only do we have a ton more active hams, but a ton more potential ARRL members as well. That's some of the work that came out of that ANF committee that I've been involved in for the last 4 or 5 months. Okay, so this is really important. And then lastly, Dan is working on trying to put together some resources for clubs and other groups that take into schools to sell at school administrators on the value of getting involved in amateur radio in their schools. Okay, so real quickly, because I do want to leave some time for Q&A here, I'm going to talk about a few projects here that the ADs are doing. So Rob has been working with headquarters, the EMC committee, which is the part of the ARRL board committees that worry about RFI issues, and the sections here in New Hampshire to put together a program to help hams resolve RFI problems. We've gotten some folks from Eversource involved and made it actually who deal with these issues and who are ham radio operators, and that Conticio is on Rob's team. We've recruited RFI troubleshooting teams in all 7 sections in New England. We've come up with an equipment kit, which includes 705, a flag antenna, which is ideal for RFI hunting, and some other equipment. Rob applied for a grant from ARDC to equip people in all 7 sections with brand new gear, got a $23,000 grant from ARDC to staff this program up with equipment, okay? And we're just waiting for the check to come through, but it's a done deal, okay? Rob has been having regular meetings with these teams. They all came out to my house to play around with the prototypes of the equipment and check it out, make sure it's kind of what they wanted to do. He's also set up a website which has a detailed step-by-step procedure for a ham to go through that's having RF problems to first confirm it's not in their home, and then to engage these people. And roundabout early next year, when we have all the equipment in hand, and by the way, he's also been out negotiating with the vendors and has gotten some pretty substantial discounts. So our $23,000 grant is probably going to go a little further than we thought it would, which is all good. We're going to start rolling this out on a pilot basis. And the intent is to take stock at the first 10 cases that are resolved and the first 25 to see if we need to make improvements in this process. And then at that stage, it will be announced and available to everybody in New England. Yeah.
On your RFI stuff and the equipment that you're going to purchase, did you guys, I know you have bought equipment from RF engineers in Portland, Oregon. Did you talk to them at all?
Yes, and in fact, a 245 and one other piece of gear is in the kit. They will be New England level resources. So we won't have one of those for all 7 teams, but we will have a set of some of the RF engineers' equipment in the kit that's available. Yep, it's good stuff.
Another comment that I would make, I didn't keep any records, but when you do troubleshooting, you get a feel. There was a very significant number of times when people would put a complaint, it wasn't the utility company. Very common.
Yeah. Grow lights, power inverters, wall warts, plasma televisions, although they're mostly gone, computers with crappy power supplies. There's a whole range of stuff. And part of the reason, the hardest challenge that Rob and the team are going to have is to get hams to go through and do the proper troubleshooting in their homes. Because we believe about 70 to 80% of what people perceive are RFI problems are probably coming out of their own homes. Okay. The other thing about, a couple things about the gear, one of the reasons we chose the 705 is it kind of has a poor person's spectrum scope. And it also has the ability to take snapshots in a battery-powered rig. So you go out to the field and you can pattern a certain RFI source, look at the spectrum across all the different bands, and this particular antenna is a fairly wide band antenna. It'll work over a large range of frequencies, and it's directional. And take screenshots of what you found. And that ultimately will become a library resource for other people who are troubleshooting certain things so they can recognize different types of interference. Yeah?
One of the things about looking for RFI that is really a problem is AGC is not your friend. The radar engineers equipment has an automatic gain control. And that is something that is really a necessity to locate. And I don't think anybody makes anything commercially that has it.
Well, one of the things you can do with a 705 is you can disable AGC. One of the things you can do with a 705 is disable AGC.
Is what?
You can disable automatic gain control.
Oh, you can?
Yes. Yes. We did quite a bit of experimenting with this particular radio, and the teams that I would say maybe half of the RFI team leaders came to my QTH1 Saturday or Sunday afternoon, and we played with all this gear. And I think everybody walked away pretty much agreed that this radio was going to be an excellent tool to do what we need to do. And quite frankly, to be able to get this level of capability in a package that costs a little over $1,000 is pretty hard to match. So that's why we went that route. So at any rate, here's the really good news about this. Assuming this works well and we can scale it up and handle it in New England, the EMC committee and the people who run that, as well as Ed Hare down at the lab, are anxious to make this a national program. So remember when I stood here last year, I talked about how we were going to do stuff in New England and turn them into national programs? Anybody remember that? Here's your first example. Okay. So, and the message I would give you about all of this, with David Minster being on board and the staffing changes he made, this is a different ARRL than we had 5-10 years ago. Now, it's very, very hard for a lot of people that are new, like Mike Walters, Steve Goodgame, Josh Johnson, who are field services and clubs, Learning Center and Teachers Institute, and Emergency Communications. Most of these people, Mike's been here a while, but the other two have been here less than a year. And there is so much broken and needs attention that they almost don't know where to start. They literally don't. I've been in several committees where people have made lists that are 3 pages long of everything we'd like to fix. So there is a lot of work that these people are trying to do. But I can tell you that they are working extremely hard. Steve Goodgame, every time I see him, by the time I get there at noon, he's on his third pot of black coffee because he's been there since 5 in the morning. And he did go home the night before till midnight, literally. This guy is killing himself. And so, why am I telling you all this? We're going to need to be patient because it does take time to fix all these things. And remember, if you know somebody who wants to throw a rock at headquarters, before you do that, ask yourself, could you do a better job? And do you know what kind of job's actually being done before you pick the rock up? So one of my biggest fears with David and the people that are here is they will get so overwhelmed and frustrated partially from a lack of people appreciating how hard they're trying to work to fix things that they will give up. So think about that. And I'd also encourage you, when you see something positive happen, try to catch somebody doing something right once in a while. Picking up the phone to Mike Walters and say, hey, I really want to thank you. We did the club grant program and, it really worked out well for us. Or the club commission program helped our club. Or maybe David Minster suggested that you get involved as a volunteer and you did that. Send these people an email or a quick phone call and catch them doing something right. Because, it takes a lot of heart and energy to take a job for probably 20% less than you could earn in a commercial application to try to help something that you truly love. And that's mostly what these people are about. All right? All right, so I think I'm going to stop there. And does anybody have any questions or feedback? Anything at all?
Tonight, Granite State Amateur Radio Association is having their monthly meeting in Manchester on Elm Street. So if you wanted to go,
okay,
it's tonight.
Or is it in person, Zoom, or both?
It's both. It's hybrid.
Send me a Zoom link. I probably can do that.
Okay, and the topic tonight is going to be scanners. We'll be talking about scanners.
Drop me the Zoom link to AB1OC at ARRL.org. What time does it start?
Starts at 7 p.m.
I'll be there.
Okay, terrific.
Okay.
And I'll write down.
Yeah, don't forget to send me the email though, because I do need the link. I don't have it.
Right.
Other questions or comments or concerns? Dale.
Well, this is probably a segue in my next talk on 10 gigahertz, which is coming up pretty soon. What does the ARRL have for plans for this huge amount of microwave spectrum that we could be in danger of losing? I really see, ever since I was a kid, I realized that a technician license could operate as well as anybody legally on all these bands.
Right.
Not too many people are actually using them except for diehard.
Right.
So to me, it's a very important mission.
Right.
For the ARRL to.
All right. So the very first thing that we're doing, and this is Rob's work, is we are working very hard to encourage people to put up ARRL networks in the 5 gigahertz band. We've got a group in Maine has received a substantial ARDC grant to do that. Rob is working diligently to try to get all these people to link their networks together. The work that I'm doing in NTS will endorse ARRL as a viable live media messaging scheme to try to encourage more people to use those networks. Dale, this is all about activity. And at one contest a year or 2 contests a year, the spectrum is going to be gone. You know what? I'll tell you how I know this. There are groups of satellite monitors who are providing data on broad spectrum measurements to the FCC on how widely the whole radio spectrum is used with a specific goal to hunt spectrum. What do you think they see when they look at our 10 gigahertz band from low Earth orbit? Nothing. 5G cellular can light those bands up, particularly for high orbit, low orbit satellite networks in a heartbeat. SpaceX is already working on that. So if we do not get activity going in these bands, they will be gone. It's guaranteed. And the best initiative that I could find was the ARRL stuff, which is why we're pushing it so hard.
It's really difficult to get anybody to adopt ARRL or to use it at all. I've tried for 5 years since the project started.
You'd be surprised. There's a group of folks in Maine that are doing a pretty bang up job. I think they just got a $25,000 or $30,000 grant from ARDC to expand their network. There's some big networks. There's one out on the West Coast that goes all the way from Wyoming down to New Mexico that was used extensively in the Colorado fires that took place a year or so ago. But you're right. It takes some effort to do this. I also said something very positive. Did you all see the new radio that ICOM announced? Right, with a remote head that can light up 5 gigahertz pretty directly and with a transverter 10 gig. We need technology assistance because, and I'm glad to see that now the cellular industry has been using these bands for a long time. I worked on a lot of that equipment when I was still working for a living. And you come to a certain point in time where you simply have to generate, to make this stuff practical and cost effective and scalable for the average person, you have to generate the RF power at the antenna. And certainly at 10 gigahertz, you're there, right? And you're pretty much already there at 5 gigahertz unless you do what Dale does and have a shack at the bottom of your tower maybe. But we're going to need help from the technology vendors to do that. And quite frankly, a lot of that is up to all of us that when a product like, what is it, the ICOM 708 or something, I forget what their model number is. It's kind of a variant of the 705 that does all this stuff that ICOM's announced. Hopefully when those products come on the market, hams will embrace them and figure out how to use them. Otherwise, you know, that spectrum is worth billions and billions of dollars. We are not going to hold on to it just out of goodwill from the FCC. That ain't going to happen, folks. I'm sorry, but it's not. There you go. There you go. I'm actually surprised they didn't go after 5 gigahertz first. 5 gigahertz in a 5G context is a much more valuable band. There's about 225 or 50 megahertz of contiguous spectrum in 5 gigahertz. Man, that is prime real estate. You can build a whole cellular network around that in a city. Yep.
I believe that's in 5G.
Yep. The problem with spread spectrum is it's heavily encumbered with IPR, with patents. And so it's very, very expensive. This is one of the things that killed CDMA. Remember Verizon pushed CDMA technology so hard? I was actually involved at Lucent Technologies in building the systems that Verizon deployed. You know what happened? Eventually, the standards that were more TDMA based and sort of individual carrier based became so much cheaper because of all the patent royalties we had to pay to deploy that technology that Verizon finally said enough, we're going with LTE. And so and the problem with this technology is for this to be available at the cost that we can afford, it has to be widely deployed commercially so that the vendors like ICOM and so on that build the equipment can sell it at reasonable cost to us.
We had problems in the urban areas because there were so many users we found it wasn't reliable for what the application was, which was the link radio system.
Right. All right, other questions or comments? Anything at all?
Comment?
Yeah.
You said that the strategic planning skills were kind of thin on the ground, either in headquarters in a league or in the field organizations. And I flashed on something. The very first time I was probably Ed's guest at the banquet at Dayton for the foundation, I ended up eating my buffet food next to a Texas millionaire. And I'm thinking that some of the Diamond Club members, whatever, some of the real high rollers got that way in life because they've got skills. So if you could find some way to jawbone the financial upper crust of the league membership, you might find some gold nuggets there.
Two comments on that, Alan. So I got it. So two comments. Not everybody who has had great financial success as an operational leader is good at strategic planning, right? So that's one challenge there. But the bigger challenge here is many of our donors feel like the current structure with the ARRL is so broken that they don't want to contribute. And it's a number one activity that we looked at how to improve in that revenue work. And it is going to be one of the top things we're going to look at in the strategic planning work, okay? And the reason for that is, quite frankly, it's me. It's the directors. They look at all of us who want to play politicians and say, you don't run a real board that way. You run it with people who have the expertise to do the job. And there are some donors, quite frankly, who are telling us that until you fix that, I'm not writing you any more checks, ARRL. Now, we can't abandon our membership-based model. People will not stand for that. And quite frankly, the very people who are elected would have to vote for it, which ain't going to happen. But we're going to need to solve that problem in some meaningful way. And I can tell you that one of the top priorities for us to look at is to make the ARRL a much more donor-funded and centric organization and much one less of an organization that has to live off of membership dues. And you know why? Because we're all going to come to a point here before very long in fixed incomes and the economic environment where we can't afford to prop the league up by paying $49 or whatever it is a year anymore. So we don't have a choice. All right. So when we talk about strategy and changing the business model, we're talking about really basic stuff, which is part of the reason that David hasn't dove into this with 2 feet. And quite frankly, probably part of the reason that I got the job on the revenue committee, so these guys could see what I'm about and whether I'm really going to be a positive force in this effort or not before they were ready to pull the trigger. So your thinking is not way off base, but we actually have a lot of work to do with the donor community. We are not in good shape there.
It's unfortunate if the current state of affairs, and I don't run around thinking, oh my God, we're in public program. I'm just in a cloud. It's unfortunate if that it impedes communication with the donors, but you might be able to get more money out of it, might be able to get it.
It's not so much,
it's a population.
you know.
I'm not saying that the lowliest tech maybe no.
So let me share some stuff that'll probably help here. I'm a big believer in all my years of doing operational work and strategic planning that you need to work with data. You can't afford to work on opinions with this stuff because too many people don't really know what's going on. So one of the things we did in the revenue committee is we took 2 fairly large, successful, predominantly donor-funded organizations that also have memberships and dues, people who might be prototypes, you could argue, for what you'd like the ARRL to look like. And we spent time with people on their boards, and they're close to it, and we looked at how those organizations operate. And if I could share it with you, you'd see there are 3 or 4 slides in the revenue recognition deck that go through what a successful donor-funded, primarily donor-funded with membership, looks like. So we know what that looks like. Let me tell you some of the stuff that's important there. Your directors, like me, should have a budget and a responsibility to take care of donors. David's getting ready to run a prototype program with 3 of us, well, which I will be one to do that, to see how that might work in the ARRL context. Secondly, donors need to understand what their money is making a difference in that they care about. And that's not about getting a coin with an ARRL logo when you give $100 more to Diamond Club. That's a much bigger set of issues than that. Thirdly, committed donors, and we have some very committed donors here in New England, are often good leads to develop other donors. And we have 0 activity going on that front. Now there's a whole, and we also, by the way, need somebody to run our donor organization that has done this successfully at the level of, say, about 10 times our current endowment, about $300 to $400 million a year. Because if you do the simple math and you assume you could tap maybe 5% of that on an interest-bearing model, that gets you about the right amount of money you need here. So we're not talking about a small tick up in the current donor program. We're talking about a real donor program if we're going to do this. Now, when you go into a strategic planning exercise and you have goals like this, you really have to do your frickin' homework because you can kind of wreck an organization by assuming you can do something you have no clue how to do. And one of our biggest challenges, and there's a list of about 6 things like this that people want to consider and look at. We're going to need to work through those. We're going to have to assess our skill set to see if we're really competent. We're going to have to assess what it's going to cost to see if we can afford it. We have to assess the people who we're trying to appeal to see if they're going to look at us as credible. There's a whole bunch of basic work that needs to be done here before any of these answers might even have a chance of seeing the light of day. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but that's the reason why we're being kind of careful about who we pick. We want people who had enough experience doing that level of exercise that whatever conclusions we decide to reach, they're good ones. This is going to be a big bet.
Nice to have the context there.
Yeah, sure. Anybody else? Anything at all? I'm probably running into the next meeting, so when I need to get the hook here, somebody just tell me. Yeah, go ahead.
So is ARRL doing anything to recruit influencers like YouTubers to talk about the
Yes.
non-amateur radio people?
Yes. Anybody know who Lon Seidman is? He's real big on Plex Media and that kind of stuff. He's a New England YouTuber here. Has a following of several 100,000 subscribers. Turns out Lon got an amateur radio license and started doing a whole series of stuff on what's it like for a new tech doing amateur radio? So what do? David, myself, and Steve Goodgame, the guy that runs the Learning Center, brought Lon to headquarters for a day, and the three of us spent a day with him introducing amateur radio, letting him work W1AW, showing him what the Learning Center could do, talking with him about ideas for content. Steve has got 3 or 4 influential YouTubers that he's courted like this, that he's working with to position content. So yes, that's a top priority of Steve Goodgame, who's our learning and education director.
Should be just reaching out to people who have a million subscribers.
That's the idea.
Get your license if you talk about it on your channel.
That's the idea. That's exactly the idea. And by the way, Steve's a great example of what I meant to say, that it's not the ARRL is not the same people anymore. It took a long time to find Steve. We moved him up, I think, from Arkansas. And he has got a totally fresh viewpoint on how to do education and training in amateur radio. Okay? So, and the only bad thing I can say for Steve, which is, by the way, the guy who's on his 3rd pot of coffee by the time I get to headquarters, is that he's got so many irons in the fire while he's trying to learn a brand new job, the poor guy doesn't really know where to start. But for example, that webinar series that I showed you, Steve is going to be handling all the operational aspects of us delivering that. So I think, I am very encouraged in my short time as director in what I see happening at headquarters. Again, my biggest concern is that we don't appreciate these folks and recognize them enough so that they continue to fight the fight at the level they're fighting it, because they are working really hard. Other questions or comments? Anything at all? All right. Folks, thank you for taking the time. Please continue to support the ARRL. Remember, try to catch somebody at headquarters doing something right. It'll make a huge difference.